Welcome to part 2 of this auto-enrolment video. In this video I'm going to show you how to implement auto-enrolment in Opera 3. My name is Steve Power and I'm one of the product specialists here at Pegasus Software. And what we're going to go through now is looking at the process of turning on auto-enrolment within Opera 3. This equally applies to Opera 2, but Opera 3 is our current product and that's what I'm going to refer to throughout this presentation. How do you record your staging date within the software? If I hop into Opera 3, then within Opera 3, if I look under the Payroll and HR Utilities, you will find there's an option there for auto-enrolment settings. If you select that auto-enrolment settings, it allows you to define your staging date there. It's important to record the staging date because not only does the software need to know what your staging date is, but at the 3-year anniversary of your staging date, you need to rerun auto-enrolment. So the software needs to know what the date is for that 3rd year anniversary. Notice as well, we also have Pension Regulator settings here. And it talks about the various thresholds that apply. So we've got the qualifying lower earnings threshold, which is annually set to 5,772, the earnings trigger, which is set to 10,000, and the upper threshold, which is set to 41,865. And that is in the current tax year that started from the 6th of April 2014. Those are the annual figures. However, it's not done cumulatively, it's done each time you run a payroll calculation. So if you had a weekly payroll, then these are the bandings that would apply to the weekly payroll. If you had a monthly payroll, then those are the bandings that would apply to a monthly payroll. Payment profiles. You need to update your payment profiles to identify those elements that build up to qualifying earnings. So if you look at your payment profiles, what you'll actually see is there's an option there for auto-enrolment. So you need to identify what are qualifying earnings. So things like salary, wages, overtime, commission bonuses, statutory sick pay, statutory maternity pay, they will all build up to something called qualifying earnings. And therefore you would need to tick this box on here to say, yes, I want that to be used within auto-enrolment for this build up of qualifying earnings. That's available to you now. So you can go through and you can apply this to those payment profiles before you get to your staging date. What about your pension schemes? If we hop back into the software, if we go under the maintenance pension schemes, if you've got an existing pension scheme and it's a qualifying pension scheme and you want to use it for auto-enrolment, then you simply tick this box here, use for auto-enrolment. If, however, you're setting up a new pension scheme, in my case I've set up both Nest and Now pensions, if I choose Nest for instance, then I have ticked on this box to say that I want to use it for auto-enrolment. I have set the percentages to be 1% employer, 1% employee. So those are the default percentages, and I've said they're going to be between the auto-enrolment thresholds set up within the system. So they're going to be between the values of 5,772 to 41,865 in the current tax year. You must remember, however, that these percentages will change over time. So when you get to beginning of October 2017, they will change to 2% employer, 3% employee. By the time you get to October 18, they will change to 3 and 5%. So you must remember to come through and change those accordingly. If you intend to link electronically into Nest pensions or into Now pensions, then within Pegasus there is a way to electronically communicate with both of those providers. This is a chargeable item, so you'll need to talk to your Pegasus partner about the charge for that integration. But if you intend to use that, then one of the things you need to be aware of is that you need to go through and set up pension groups. So if you're linking into Nest, what Nest need to know is what is the export file? Well, obviously it's going to be the Nest export file, but what is the group? So in other words, I could set one up for my monthly group. I could also set up another pension group for instance, for my weekly group, which is what I've done here. So I've got my monthly group, I've got my weekly group. If you're using Now pensions, then again you need to go through and set up the Now pensions, and you need to define that you are producing the Now pension export file. So you need to set those up before you can therefore add them into the pension provider. If I go back into the pension scheme, and for instance if I look at my Nest pension and I go into the provider tab, it now allows me to define which export file do I need to produce. So obviously I'm working with the Nest pension scheme, then of course therefore the Nest export file is the one that I'll use. And that's where it also allows you to go through and identify that particular group. If I go onto the Now Pensions one, then I would therefore select the export file type to be Now Pensions. If you're using Nest Pensions, it has this concept of holding on to contribution. During the opt-out period, if somebody opts out during the opt-out period, then you need to return the contributions you've taken off them and you need to hand them back to those employees. Nest provides this facility where you can say that the contributions aren't to be handed across to Nest during the opt-out period. In which case, if you've got a weekly payroll and I've auto-enrolled somebody into the Nest pension scheme, and then next week they opt out, well then I can hand the contributions back to them immediately because the cash was never handed across through to Nest in the first place. So there is an advantage of using Nest there. Now Pensions does not have this concept, so in which case you as the employer would need to get the contributions back from Now Pensions and then you'd hand them back through to your employees. What do you do when you get to your staging day? Well, within the software, we need to turn on the processing of auto-enrolment. How do I do that? If I go into the utilities, set options, if I go onto the second page, there's an option here to use auto-enrolment processing. And if I turn that on, then it just warns you, remember, only turn this on if you want auto-enrolment to become live. And I do. Let's assume I've just reached my staging date, so that's exactly what I want to happen. How do you assess your workforce into one of the three categories: eligible job holder, non-eligible job holder, entitled worker? Well, there's a number of ways you can do it. If I hop back into the software and go into the processing form, now that I've turned on auto-enrolment, so here I'm on Richard Godson's record, if I go down to the pensions option, I now have access to the auto-enrolment details. And if I go into the auto-enrolment details, I can manually set Richard to be an eligible job holder, non-eligible job holder, entitled worker. And I can manually say whether Richard has been auto-enrolled or whether Richard has been postponed and what have you. So I can manually go through and do this process. However, I would need to understand the rules. How old is Richard? How much money does Richard earn? So that could be quite cumbersome. So I won't use that method. However, if I run the calculate option, the software can do this for me automatically. In other words, the software knows how old Richard is and knows how much Richard earns. So in this example, it has set Richard's category to be that of an eligible job holder. So what I'm saying there is the payroll calculation can do this automatically for you. And if I say OK to that, it then says, I know that Richard is an eligible job holder, but I don't know what you want to do. You can either auto-enroll Richard or you could postpone Richard for up to 3 months. So you need to tell the system which of those two options you're taking because the software won't know which choice you make. Now if I go and have a look at the pension details for Richard, I will see that Richard has been set to an eligible job holder based upon that payroll date, based upon those earnings. Now again, I'm not suggesting you do this individually, but I'm just showing you that the payroll calculation assesses your workforce. So in which case, if I run the full calculation, this will do that assessment for all of your workers. So here I'm going through doing the calculation. It will then go through and print out the standard payroll report for me. So if I publish this report through the screen, I can see that it has set, in this example, Richard Godson has been set to an eligible job holder, but you've got to decide whether you're going to auto-enroll them or postpone them, and it's going through all of your workers. Here, for instance, we've got Mrs. Owen has been set to an entitled worker. So the payroll calculation does the assessment of the workers for you. If I run the pensions report auto-enrolment details, and if I run this as a summary report through the screen, I can see exactly what it's done for those group of workers in that monthly payroll. So I'll send this report through the screen, and here we go. Here we can see that Richard was set to an eligible job holder, and Mrs. Ann Owen was set to an entitled worker, Ronald Masson was set to a non-eligible job holder. In other words, you can see the result of the payroll calculation and how it's categorizing your workforce into each of those individual categories. The next thing we need to do is we now need to go through and notify the eligible job holders, for instance, that they are going to get auto-enrolled into the pension schemes. How do I do that? Well, I might have downloaded the letter from the Pensions Regulator, that letter that tells about auto-enrolment, so in which case I might have sent that through to all of my eligible job holders. How do I tell the system that I've done that? Well, if we look at the global changes, there's something called Auto-Enrolment Updates. Now, if I select the Auto-Enrolment Updates, this allows me to go through and update the employee records on bulk. So, for instance, there's a range of criteria. I can use the profiles from to, employees from to, departments from to, pension schemes from to. In my example, I'm going to choose all of the eligible job holders, and I'm going to tell the system for all of those eligible job holders, I have sent them that letter. If I was going to postpone for 3 months, then I'll select this option here. What status? Well, I'm going to set the status to be postponed, and I'm going to manually input the end date. So what is the date of the end of the postponement? And that can be up to 3 months in the future. In my example, however, I'm not going to postpone. I'm actually going to auto-enroll my workers. So in which case, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the system that I have sent the auto-enrolment information to each of my employees, and the date that I sent them to my employees was the 1st of April. It therefore shows you a list of those eligible job holders, and you can be selective. You might not want to send that letter to all of those. So I'm going through and saying, yeah, all of these people have been sent that particular letter. It therefore goes through and shows you an audit trail of who has received that letter from you. And I'll run this audit trail through to screen. And there we go. Here's a list of all the people that have been sent that particular letter. Now, if we go and have a look at Richard's record and have a look at the auto-enrolment details, we can see that it's now recorded the date that Richard got that particular letter. Okay, let's now assume that we've moved on. We're now 2 weeks down the line, and I have provided the pension provider with all the information about these employees, and the pension provider has now given me these packs to hand out to the employees. So I now want to go through and I want to auto-enroll those workers into that pension scheme. How can I do that? Well, again, if I use the global changes, auto-enrolment updates, I can say that for all of those eligible job holders, I'm going to change their status. I'm going to change their status to be auto-enrolled. On what date? Well, we're on the 15th of April, was the date that I auto-enrolled them. Did you auto-enroll them into a pension scheme? Yeah. For those workers, in my example here, I'm going to put them all into the Nest pension scheme. And did you provide the information packs from the pension provider? Yeah. The contract-based information from the pension provider was given through to all of my employees, and in this example, I'm going to give that information to them on the 15th of April. So I'm auto-enroll all of those workers into Nest, and I'm giving them that information packs that tells them about it. Here are all the workers, and again, I can be selective. It then goes through and gives me an audit trail report, which I can print. In this example, I'll print through to screen. And here they all are. Here are all the eligible job holders. Their current status is set to not auto-enrolled, but these are all the workers that are going to be auto-enrolled into those pension schemes. If we also use the global changes to set the opt-out period, so I now know that I auto-enrolled these workers into the pension scheme on the 15th of April, I'm now going to go through and set the opt-out period for these workers. The opt-out start period started on the 15th of April. And therefore I'm going to update all of these workers with that information. Again, it will give me the audit trail report, which I will send through to screen. And notice this time, their status has all changed to be auto-enrolled. And if we now go and have a look at Richard's record, we will see what's actually happened. So if I go down and have a look at the auto-enrollment details, Richard has been auto-enrolled. Richard was auto-enrolled on that date, and Richard was given the information packs from the pension provider also on that date. So we can see that the system is automatically going through and updating that information. Okay, what happens if Richard wants to opt out? If we hop back into the software and we look at the postponement or stop tab, we can see the opt-out period started from the 15th of April and goes through to the 14th of May. What was the date you received the opt-out notice from Richard? And provided it's between those two dates, therefore we can go through and we can say Richard has opted out, and we can therefore return the contributions that we've taken off to Richard, and we return them back to him in the next processing of the payroll. Can Richard opt out? Let's say Richard notices 6 months later that he's paying into the pension scheme, and then Richard contacts me to say, I want to opt out. Can Richard opt out 6 months down the line? The answer is no, he can't. He can only opt out in that opt-out period. However, Richard can cease membership of the pension scheme at any point Richard chooses to cease membership. However, when Richard ceases membership, it's under the basis of the rules for that particular pension provider. So, for instance, that pension provider might say, you've got to give us, I don't know, 3 months notice before you can cease membership. In which case, Richard would have to give 3 months notice. So Richard can cease membership of that pension scheme at any time, but it's under the rules of that pension scheme. And if Richard ceases membership, then you put the date that Richard ceased membership. You must also remember to go into the pension scheme and say what was the date that Richard had left that particular pension scheme. So in which case, record that sort of information in there as well. Registering with the Pensions Regulator. You need to register with the Pensions Regulator within 5 months of your staging date. So if you go onto the Pensions Regulator website, one of the options there is for registering with them. And if you go into take this particular option, it'll allow you to go through and register with the Pensions Regulator. There is a checklist you can print out because there's a number of questions they're going to ask, such as what were the number of employees that were auto-enrolled into a particular pension scheme. So print out that checklist. There's also a video as well, a short video that is run. So have a look at that short video and it gives you information as to how you fill out that checklist. Also within the software, you can, under the auto-enrolment settings, record the date that you registered with the pension regulator. Because 6 months, 12 months down the line, you won't remember that date, so it's best to record it within the software itself. Now, Nest pension integration. Remember what I said earlier, you can electronically communicate with the Now pension provider and with the Nest pension provider. That's a chargeable option within the software itself. So how can we do that? If I hop back into the software, I'm going to run a payroll calculation. And the reason I'm running the payroll calculation is because I have auto-enrolled a number of workers into, in my example here, the Nest pension scheme. So in which case, by running the calculation is therefore going through and it's working out what contributions need to be taken off those particular workers and what contributions me as the employer needs to add to those contributions. So having run that calculation, I can now go through and I can generate these export files. So if I go into the pension reports, I can generate an enrolment file to be sent through to the Nest pension provider. So if I select this option here, it says, okay, do you want to do it for all of your pension groups for Nest? Yes, please. Those are all the workers that are in there. That's good. 25 of them have been selected. Do you want to look at the Audit Trail report for it? Well, yes, I do. Let's print the Audit Trail report through the screen. And there's a list of all of those workers that are going into this auto-enrolment file. And it tells me I've created the pension enrolment file. I've created it in your company data directory for Company Z. Now, if I was linked into Nest, I would now log on to the Nest website, and one of the options in the Nest website is to upload this auto-enrolment file, in which case I'd point it to that file in that data directory. And in which case, Nest would then have all the information it needs to auto-enroll those workers. What about the contribution file? If I go into the pensions report and select contribution file, it says, which pension scheme are you using this for? So in my example, I'm going to use it for Nest because I auto-enroll them to Nest. If I was using Now Pensions, then I would select Now Pensions. There is a difference between Nest and Now. The Nest pension has two files. It has the auto-enrolled file and it has the contribution file. For Now Pensions, it's all in the one file. In other words, this option here to go through and create the contribution file, for Now Pensions, it includes all of the details of the workers as well as their contribution information. So you only need to create one file for Now, but you need to create two files for Nest. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to create this file. I'm going to create it for my monthly group, and it was the payroll period from the 1st of April through to the 30th of April, paying the contributions across to Nest on the 22nd of May. Here are all the workers. Yes, that's looking good. There's 25 of them. Let's go through and produce the Audit Trail report first, and I'll print this Audit Trail report through the screen. And here we go. Here's all the contributions that are going through. So those are the employees' contributions, those are the employer contributions, and those are the totals that are going through to the Nest pension scheme. And it creates the file. Z_pension contribution file, created in your company data directory, and in which case I would now log on to the Nest site, and within the Nest site there is an option to go through and upload this information across through to a Nest. If you're using the Now Pensions, then again there's a similar option. You go into the Now Pensions, and one of those options will be to upload the Now pension file. And that's it. That has allowed me to go through and pass that information electronically through to both the Nest pension provider and the Now pension provider. Communication with your workforce. You need to inform workers about the auto-enrolment process, but the information that you give to them will depend upon their category. So eligible job holders get a specific type of letter, non-eligible job holders get a different letter, and so on and so on and so on. These letter templates can be downloaded from the Pensions Regulator website, or indeed they can be downloaded from whichever pension provider you are using. These letters themselves define the detail that needs to be sent to each of those category of worker. How can we achieve this using Opera 2 or Opera 3? Well, you need to assess which category a worker falls into. But remember, when we ran the payroll calculation, what we actually saw there is that it identified the category of worker. So it went through and told us who were eligible job holders, non-eligible job holders, and entitled workers. Well, if we have that information categorized, can we use it? Well, yes, we can. If we use something called Pegasus XRL, this allows us to extract that data into an Excel spreadsheet. Once we've extracted into that Excel spreadsheet, we can then go through and share that information via mail merge with Word. So in which case, if we downloaded those letters from the TPR website, Nest and the like, we can therefore link those bits of information together. How can we do this? Well, if I go through into a spreadsheet, here I'm on a blank spreadsheet. If I use XRL, then what I can do is I can create a detailed report that extracts information from the payroll. So if I do this, if I go into the payroll and I go into the employees file, I can now select the data from the employees file. So if I'm going to do a mail merge, then I guess what I really need is the name and address information. So let's pull in the employee reference. The next thing I'll take is maybe I'll take the forename and the surname, and I will take things such as their address details. So address line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and the postcode, and I guess also need to know what their auto-enrolment category is. So I'm going to go down this list here. I'm going to look at the auto-enrolment section, and I'm going to bring in their category this period. And that's it. I now have a spreadsheet that has all of this information in. So here we go. I've got a spreadsheet that has the name and address and the auto-enrolment category for all of my workers. So I can see eligible job holders, non-eligible job holders and the like. I could filter this. So for instance, I don't want to have all of the workers here. I'm just going to go through and have my eligible job holders. So I'm going to filter by the category and only have the eligible job holders. And here we go. Here's a list of all the eligible job holders that I have on there. Now once I have this spreadsheet, I can go across to Word and have a look at the Word template from, say, the Pensions Regulator's website. And here is that document here. I can now start to modify this document to include those merged fields. In other words, I'm going to change the document to look a little bit like this. So I've embedded my company logo, the address of my company. I've changed the layout of this document, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to insert a merged field. So in which case I'm going to put in the surname at this point, and I'll put in all the rest of the fields here. Once I've done that, then what I can do is I can print out the letters. So here we go. Here's the first letter that is to go to Wendy Turner, saying, Wendy, you're an eligible job holder. Your earnings are between these levels here. And in which case, it then allows us to go through and send these letters through to those individuals. If you go onto the Pegasus website, pegasus.co.uk, and you go into the Media Centre, you'll see under the Media Centre, there's a whole range of product demos. And if you select those product demos, you'll find there's a range of useful information there. So you might want to look at videos on credit management, a video on XRL, or you might be interested in having a look at the videos on payroll specifics, such as payroll self-service, which allows you to go through and produce electronic payslips as opposed to printed payslips. You might be introducing salary sacrifice as part of your implementation of auto-enrolment, in which case if you want to understand how salary sacrifice works, go and have a look at that short video there. Okay, that concludes this video of enacting auto-enrolment within Opera 3. I hope you found the information useful. If you need further information, then please go back to your Pegasus partner. Thank you for watching this video.